Hey everyone, welcome back to OCD Recovery's YouTube channel. Before I go any further, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button. If you're interested in any of the webinar services, please email phil@ocdrecovery.com. We have a bunch of webinars coming up. You can ask them in the title. We'll send you some of the webinar lists. We do them every Tuesday, 8:30 p.m. UK time, and they're just a lot of fun. So Rob and I were just talking about, what do we think are some of the topics that we've been seeing with a lot of the new people coming in, a lot of the webinars. Because we have a chronic guilt seminar coming up in I think about a month, I wanted to talk about shame and guilt and what perpetuates the chronicity of shame and guilt, what themes can produce those, because there's so many of them, and how to actually get underneath that. But before that, I'm going to drink this amazing caramel. Not the whole thing. That would be so... How awkward would that be? I'm just quiet. And then I start the video. Okay. So when you're suffering with chronic shame and chronic guilt, okay, so it's important to remember that shame and guilt have symptoms such as sensations, such as physical anxiety. So shame and guilt, anyone who's experienced chronic shame and guilt, where it feels like you're judging execution on yourself, you are constantly feeling that dark loss of interest sensation that could kind of blend into depression symptoms. That is also a sensation. So part of the recovery journey of that is understanding that you're probably going to feel chronically shame and guilt. The sensation itself, any intrusive thoughts, images, or urges that come along with that, until we get a little bit better with unconditional self-life and other acceptance, which I'll cover soon. Now, what are some of the fears that can produce, chronic shame and chronic guilt? So we have the big ones, right? Harm OCD and POCD mixed in with false memory and real event. Then we have cheating OCD. Cheating OCD is a big one too. What happens with our OCD when someone is experiencing, say, chronic guilt or shame relating to a false memory / real event surrounding cheating, what that person may do is go round and round on their Facebook, go all the way back to years, constantly message people that were around potentially that night. So maybe they went out the night, back in 2010, but that's what they think, because OCD will go, was it 2011? Was it 2009? Blah, blah, blah. That's why trying to dive into the past is really, it doesn't go anywhere with OCD. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging the potential of the past, but that's not what OCD sufferers do. They go down the rabbit hole time and time again, diving into the past, trying to find certainty on an event. This is one of the most common forms of compulsive searching for certainty when it comes to false memory and real event. And I always say the reason why we call it false memory and real event is because it doesn't matter if it did or did not happen. And that's really important. So it could be a false event that seems like a real event, or false memory in a real event. It could be a real event that has false memory switched in. It really doesn't matter what the scenario is, whether it did or did not happen. Unconditional self-life and other acceptance can get underneath that. So when we say wear anxiety like an uncomfortable coat, we also mean wear chronic shame and guilt. So talking about what we kind of open this video with, you're going to have to wear that sensation everywhere you go. Your wedding day, your birthday parties, the anniversary, the birth of your children, at work, anywhere and every place that chronic shame and guilt will bring it up, you will do that. Now, we have obviously all the exposures and stuff that you can kind of set for yourself with harm OCD and POCD, but we're not going to cover that in this video. We're just going to talk about the belief systems that can perpetuate chronic shame and chronic guilt, because it comes down to a belief system. So one of the biggest misconceptions in the mental community based around shame and guilt is that shame and guilt is not perpetuated primarily by a belief system, but that is incorrect, because we know it's incorrect. We've seen it for years and years and years and years through Ellis's work, through rational thinking. We've seen it with hundreds and thousands of people that have come in through OCD recovery over the last 10 years who have recovered from serious false memory real event, POCD, harm OCD, chronic shame and guilt. Sam, who just did a great video talking about compulsions surrounding POCD and his journey, talks about his journey with those sensations, how it was blasting all the time during intimacy, everywhere he went, how he avoided watching movies, and all those subtle avoidance behaviors because of the way it made him feel. And he does a great job of explaining that in that video. I highly recommend watching that. So what we have is we have A plus B equals C. Now, A plus B equals C is the premise. It's basically the structure of what will cause continual unhealthy emotional experiences such as chronic shame and chronic guilt. And you can add this into DPDR, depersonalization, derealization. You can add this in there with chronic symptoms of anxiety, whatever that may be, groinal responses, so forth and so forth. So Let's say we have an activating event that something may or may not have happened in your childhood when you were surrounding a family member, whatever it is, or anything along the lines of that. So in your mind, when that false memory / real event mixed in there with harm and POCD becomes a latching fear, understandably so, you think that activating event is the reason why you have shame and guilt. But there's actually a belief system in there that's causing their continual experience of shame and guilt. Now, shame and guilt are natural human emotions. Shame and guilt are chronically unhealthy in people that don't have OCD. We're talking PTSD. We're talking about forms of depression. We're talking about people who don't have any of that. They're just, something may or may not have happened to them in their life, and they think, there's no way, if only I was there, if only I would have done something, and so forth and so forth. But that's not what we can do. All we can do is acknowledge the potential of the past and then work on the belief systems that we hold in now. And that's really, really important for getting over that chronic shame and that chronic guilt. So what do some of those belief systems look like? Usually all of them are relating to some type of being a bad person, right? This is why the third book on the reading list, The Myth of Self-Esteem, Chapter 4, Psychotherapy and the Value of the Human, which is a 40 to 50 page chapter that will break down self-esteem. I'm not going to go too much into that. I'm just giving you a background of the belief systems that perpetuate the chronicity of shame and guilt. And like I said, shame and guilt, those are natural human emotions, just like anger, just like anxiety is designed to save your life. When you're experiencing that in a chronic format, there's something else going on that usually we don't want to address. And until we address that with unconditional self-life, other acceptance, what I'm about to go into, those symptoms seem to linger. Now, before I go into anything further about the belief systems and the unconditional self-life, other acceptance, to get underneath that and no longer experience chronic shame and guilt, there is one thing I do want to cover. When it comes to false memory, real event, harm OCD, POCD, so forth, retroactive jealousy, cheating OCD, these ones that kind of have those shame and guilt sensations and belief systems, exposures will only do you so far. That doesn't mean they can't be beneficial. There's never been a person that I've ever met, nor Rob, who has had chronic false memory, real event with a harm or POCD mixed in there, who has recovered by just doing exposures. Now, exposures are great. They bring down avoidance behaviors. One of my favorite quotes is, show me your behaviors and I'll tell you your belief systems. Very important. Not always, but it is a good quote and there is some merit to it. But you'll more than likely need to go into the context of the fear. So when people say the context doesn't matter, it's incorrect, because if the context didn't matter, there wouldn't be targeted exposures. There wouldn't be targeted unconditional self-life, other acceptance. So if the content didn't matter, we would just do random exposures, move with uncertainty, and recover. And I've never met someone with chronic OCD in this format with shame and guilt, because of the societal beliefs and the perceptions that have actually reached a robust level of recovery, like Sam and like Jade and other moderators and people who have come and go without addressing the core belief. So the fear of being a bad person, I don't deserve this, back to the belief systems, I'm terrible, this shouldn't have happened, my life isn't fair, I don't deserve this. If you read the first book on the reading list, How to Stubbornly Refuse to Make Yourself Miserable About Anything, yes, anything, Albert Ellis goes into all these belief systems, and there's exercises in every single chapter, or 90% of the chapters, and they're really good. It's getting close to Christmas, so I gotta get my Christmas cup out. We have like 35 coffee mugs, maybe more. We'll blame it on Erica. Some of them are mine, but we'll blame it on Erica. So it is really important to realize that those belief systems plus the OCD will equal the shame and the guilt. Okay, it's not just, make it very simple. Let's do a real event. This happened, which means I should have guilt forever. No, the belief system you hold about that event, let's say it absolutely did happen for simplicity of this example, still doesn't mean that you have to experience chronic shame and chronic guilt. So once you look at the belief systems that you're holding, those irrational beliefs based around shoulds, musts, and oughts, the only thing that is really a straight hard need in this world is oxygen, water, and not even shelter, if you actually look at that in some areas. But water and food you absolutely need. You do not need to experience chronic shame and chronic guilt. Now, that might not seem like it plays into this, but it does help break down those belief systems in the long run. So how do you break them down? by applying unconditional self-life and other acceptance through the principles of the books I just mentioned. If you want to look for those books, they're at ocdrecovery.com under the resource tab, and there's 6 books there. I've mentioned those books before, but the 2 particularly pertain to shame and guilt because they come from the fear of being a bad person and writing themselves off, is based off the 3rd book, which is The Myth of Self-Esteem, breaking down why self-esteem and why conditional self-acceptance are so problematic for people in their lives. In the opening paragraph of the book, I believe, or chapter 4, the one we always recommend, it says, there's no greater cause for emotional disturbances in humans than the belief of self-esteem. So let me give you an example of what self-esteem looks like and why it's not applicable to anyone unless you're perfect. And I don't know anyone who's perfect. So you go to the fair. Many of you have heard me talk about this example. You go to the fair and you have the hammer, right? And you slam the hammer down and you try to hit the bell up top. That's what conditional self-acceptance, aka self-esteem, is like. You do things in your life to prove, so the compulsions. You check things, you confess, you search for reassurance. You come up, but you never hit it, and you fall short. You never hit it. And maybe in the beginning, this compulsive behavior lasts a little bit longer for relief. Then it drops back down, the symptoms come, you got to do another compulsive behavior, reassurance seeking, whatever it may be. And then over time, the amount of time that this relief lasts in a short-term sense becomes so minuscule that you're doing hundreds of compulsions a day. This is what we see when we work with people who have shame and guilt, and this is why it's so important to break that down. Now, once you find your belief systems and you have an understanding of the books, then you start to apply that acceptance doesn't mean agreement, and that why there's no such thing as a good and bad person in entirety. There are only people with certain genetic traits, certain socioeconomic backgrounds, certain environments, and they have done things in their life, but even the most vile and evil people that you imagine have people that like them. Take someone who's a serial killer that had a family, people are like, whoa. So those people like them. So how do you conceptualize whether they're 100% a bad person or not? It's not that simple. They're just a person who has done many, many heinous acts that I don't agree with, but I wouldn't write the person off. It's also important to remember that this isn't just for other people, it's for yourself. When you hold conditional self-acceptance on yourself or conditional other acceptance, the person who has to deal with the unhealthy emotions such as chronic shame, guilt, depression is yourself. It doesn't matter what anyone else is doing, it's for yourself. You want to help this to make yourself get better, change your own perspectives. And that's really what you want to do, and that's the blueprint to bring down the chronicity of the shame and guilt. Now look, where you live, if you live in a place like America or, a first westernized country, because of the belief systems we have as a culture, that will look different from generation to decades to centuries. And, the value systems we hold now were a little bit different than they were 800 years ago and probably a lot different than 3,000 years ago. So they will change in centuries and multiple generations as we're seeing certain values, societal values change now. So looking at that and understanding that other people will not understand why you're trying to break down these fears. They don't need to understand. I want to cover that too, because in your mind, we think that, well, there's no way no one else will accept me. We don't need anyone else to accept us. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's very important to read the 3rd book on the reading list and the 4th chapter. 3rd book, 4th chapter, Myth of Self-Esteem again, Psychotherapy and the Value of Human. Have to read it probably 2 or 3 times. It's a difficult read, but you can do it. It's also an exposure, reading things when you're suffering and realizing that the shame and the guilt will probably perpetuate for months and months and months while you start to move towards your worst case scenario and break it down, which you can do. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget again about all the webinars, emailing phil@ocdrecovery.com. Hope to see you there. The chronic guilt one's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to go into severe, I think severe is the right word. We're going to go into a lot of detail about this, breaking down examples and do a Q&A. So thank you so much. As always, have a great day.